Welcome, everyone, to the December 2011 Professor Messer CompTIA A+ study group session. This is a live online study group. I'll take your questions. I'll listen to what you're saying in the chat room. You've sent me questions prior to this, and we're just going to spend an hour or so talking about A+ types of things, not just things that are on the exam. We'll talk about the exam as well, and I've got other things mixed amongst all of these different questions and things going by. This is something I try to do every month. So far, it's been working out pretty well so far. The objective for me when I started working on these was to be able to simply spend some time going through what people are asking about. As you can imagine, I get a lot of questions sent to me during the month, a lot of things where people are asking about changes going on with the exam, things they should be studying, topics that are really having them go through quite a bit of struggle and a lot of problems to get through, and people want to know more. So I like being able to do these live sessions. This week, we are doing our A+ live session. A week from today, we'll be doing a Network Plus live session. So you can go out to professormesser.com/calendar and sign up and put your question in as well. And of course, you can just send me a question in an email. At the top of the page on every Professor Messer page is the Contact Us link that goes right into my inbox, right into my telephone, or right into my mobile device. Wherever I'm going, I'll be able to see your questions that are coming through. This is something that is supported also by your purchase of the CompTIA downloadable course. I obviously provide all of my videos absolutely free for you to watch as much as you want on the internet, but many times people would like to be able to take those with them. They're on a plane, they're on a train, they're in their car, or maybe they're just not connected to the net, or maybe they'd like audio type of version, an MP3 version they can take along with them. That's what the downloadable course is for, and we appreciate everyone who has supported the downloadable course with that as well. This month, I wanted to go through a number of different things, but before I do, someone sent in a question saying, I have my A+ certification. I'm collecting the units that you need, the continuing education units, to be able to keep my certification. And does this particular webcast does it qualify to be able to get one of those certification types? And it absolutely does. This is the CompTIA certification FAQ. And you can see if you participate in an industry event, a seminar, a workshop, a podcast/webinar, or conference, then you get 1 CEU for each hour spent in each session. You have to provide a description of the activity, the content that was covered, time and date, location, and proof of completion provided by the activity host where applicable. Although this is pretty public, it's kind of difficult to miss this one because you can always go back on YouTube and look at it. And you can get for the A+ a maximum of 4 CEUs per that 3-year cycle. For Network Plus, it's 6 CEUs. For Security Plus, although I'm not doing any Security Plus, but I think I am talking about some security things in here from time to time, there are 10 CEUs, and the activity guidelines are right there. So that's something that also helps along those lines as well. So let's jump into what we're doing here today. What I did was get your questions. And if you've signed up for this in the email, and I sent you an update about 15 minutes ago saying we were going to start right into your email piece, the questions that we came in are submitted right there. And I, of course, get questions as well throughout the week. People will send me things. And I keep making this go up and up. So last time there were millions of questions submitted. Now we're up to billions of questions have been submitted. So we've got quite a bit that we can go through. Now, every month, I like to start with a question that really, for me, encapsulates what we are doing here. And the question that came in when I asked you, what is the most important thing you want to get out of this month's study group session? What is the one question? If you could ask that one question, what is the one question that you would like to have answered? And the answer that I got from KM was answer all of them, answer everything. Well, I don't know that I'm going to go through every possible answer to every possible question, but I'll start. 42 will be the initial answer. I don't know if anything else qualifies rather than that, but I will try to hit on as many things as I can. And of course, as we go through this, if you're watching this, the recording of this, obviously you won't be participating live, but for those of you in the chat room, your chat room is right here to my right. I am looking at your chat room right now. If there are questions as we go through this, stick them in the chat room. I'll be glad to address those as well. Let's go through some questions and let's talk about content that's on the A+ exam. What types of things from a technology perspective do I need to know about? And our first question that came in is from Steve S. And he asked, what is the difference between a hub and a switch? And if you recall, I believe it's section 4, domain 4 is the networking domain of the 701 exam. And so for that domain piece, you can see there is a number of things you have to know about. And there are these technologies that we plug our networks into, these hubs, these switches, these routers, and they're doing different things. They're put in a different way. And you have to make a decision. Are you going to plug things in your network? Do I need a hub? Do I need a switch, or do I need a router? So let's go through each one of those and understand what the differences are, because there are important differences between all three of those. Let's start with a hub. Now, if you can find a hub today, then you have somehow managed to get an archaic type piece of machinery. You have found something that is not made anymore. You cannot find for sale a brand new hub. And no manufacturer these days is making a hub. The only hubs that are available out there are hubs for 10 megabit Ethernet and 100 megabit Ethernet. Those are the most common ones that you'll have. You don't see hubs for gigabit technologies, although there is part of the gigabit specification that does talk about the ability to have a shared environment like this that this hub provides. It's something that nobody ever implemented because they implemented switches, which we will talk about in just a moment. So if you are looking for a hub, and these become very, very important because they become useful for people that are doing network analysis. You can plug into this connection and you can put multiple devices on here, and a network protocol analyzer can see all the packets coming from all of the devices. So it's almost like a tap from that scenario for a 10 megabit or 100 megabit Ethernet network. And that's why you see them on eBay. People will sell them. I have about 3 of them. This is one of the ones that I have. I have about 3 of them that I keep in the corner, and occasionally I will pull them out and I will put them on a network to start troubleshooting things, because that's one of the easiest and most inexpensive ways to plug in. That's because we consider this to be a multi-port repeater. The way this works is that if you're plugging in, let's see if I can go back one slide. Here we go. Let's see if I can get something up on the screen. So if I plug in to any one of these connections that are on this particular hub, if traffic goes into that port, it is repeated to every other port that is on that hub. This is just a 4-port hub. There are 8-port hubs, there are 16-port hubs, there are 24-port hubs. If one packet goes into that hub, it's copied to all other 23 ports. Everybody hears everybody else on a hub. There is no separation. There is no delineation of the signal. If you send packet in there, it is repeated to everybody else, which is why it's so useful as a network analysis tool. This is really old school. And as you can imagine, as traffic gets busier and busier, you now start to have Ethernet collisions, and now you have the performance of the network degrading a bit because of all of the additional traffic going across it. So it was great early on because it was a simple way to plug in. It was very simple in how it operates. In fact, it doesn't even make decisions based on traffic coming in. It just says, if I receive something, I'm spitting it out to everybody else. We're just going to repeat it to everybody because I'm a hub. I make no differentiation between that traffic. And one of the issues, of course, is that makes things go slower. If 2 people, if one person decides to stream a really big file to someone else, that now impacts everybody else who's plugged into that hub. Those were good times indeed when we were working on networks and trying to figure out, why is it so slow? Why are we having such problems? Well, we could find problems with a station blasting out traffic, and it affected everybody on the network. So perhaps not the most effective way to network, but at one time, that's all we had. There was no switching technology to be had. That goes back quite a ways, but those days did exist, and we had everybody stuck on these hubs. So we needed a smarter way to do this. We realized sending one packet in and have everybody looking at that packet and everybody hearing that packet was just not a very good way to manage the technology. We wanted some way to take the topologies that we built, these high-speed networks that we built, and have a way to make sure that it could be as efficient as possible. We could do a file transfer and it would not impact everybody else. And so we needed some other kind of technology because, as Steve is asking in the chat room, if you're using a hub and you're downloading a big file, Would it get sent to everybody connected to the network? Well, the packets would get sent to everybody else on the network. Absolutely. Everybody else on that hub, everybody else on that shared network. Only the station receiving the packet based on its MAC address, based on its IP address, and other things as well, would be actually grabbing the packet and putting it into memory and doing something with it. But somebody who is putting a sniffer, some other type of network analysis tool, Wireshark, or anything else on there would absolutely be able to capture all of the packets in that file transfer and very easily reconstruct the file once it's done. Those types of technologies are very easy to find. Wireshark does a great job of doing those types of things. So that wasn't really working so well for us. So we changed things to be switched. This was a brand new technology when it was introduced. And what this allowed us to do, we could have very small switches, 8-port switches, 4-port switches, 16, or even bigger switches like you see on the screen here. But one of the things we were able to do with this was make decisions about where traffic went. If traffic goes in one port, the switch was smart enough to examine that packet and go, in this packet, you're sending it to this particular MAC address. On my switch, I'm only going to send that traffic out the particular port that is connected to that particular MAC address. It is making an intelligent decision on where traffic goes based on the layer 2 address, the MAC address of what's going through the network. You don't send a packet in on a file transfer and have it go to every other port on the switch, which means 2 people could be doing a file transfer on a couple ports over here. 2 people could be doing a file transfer on a couple ports over there. Neither one of them knows that the other 2 are doing that. They are completely separated. Those conversations never get in the way of each other. So obviously that is a much more efficient way to do networking. And even today, this is the primary method of connecting in-station devices, servers, and everything else in your network is using these big switches or even a small switch. If you're in a small office, a home office, you have a switch built into your router. If you are in a mid-size office, you have larger switches. If you're in a really big enterprise environment, you might have a switch that looks like this. It is an absolutely normal part of what we're doing today, but it has to be intelligent. There's some smarts in here. There's a big table that it keeps of nothing but MAC addresses and where those MAC addresses are located. And that way, whenever it sees traffic coming in, it looks up very quickly in its table. Where does that packet go? Where's it go? Oh, it goes over here because that's where that particular MAC address is plugged in. And that is switching technology. Now, the thing that goes one step further than that, and this wasn't asked in the question, but I thought I would add it into this as well, is the router. So the router is now up one extra OSI layer than this. Your router makes decisions on where traffic is going as well. Routers aren't like hubs. You don't send traffic into a router and the router spits it out to every port. It doesn't work that way. You don't send traffic into a router and the router does not work like a switch. It does not look up things by MAC address and figure out where things go. Nope, doesn't work that way either. Your router makes a determination of where traffic goes based on the layer 3 address, the IP address of a workstation. So it sees traffic coming through that says you need to go to 10.1.1.1. I have a table inside of my router that lists out where all of the networks are, and I know that 10.1.1.1 is out that way, and it sends the packet out another port. That is why we sometimes call this a layer 3 switch, or sometimes switches will have in them the ability to route, and we'll occasionally say that it's running at layer 3 inside of that switch. So sometimes we take router functionality and switch functionality and we cram it into one device. But in your mind, you should separate those out. The switching makes decisions based on MAC address. Your router makes decisions based on IP address. It really is that simple. And as long as you keep those things straight, you're going to be just fine figuring out, is it a router, is it a switch, or is it a hub? And I think if you blend all of those things together and look at them separately, you'll be able to make that determination. One nice thing about routers as well is that they're able to connect to many different media types. You don't often see this in switching. Switching is usually connecting up like media types, connecting Ethernet to Ethernet. But routers connect up and blend together different types of media. So it's very common, for instance, in my home office, I have a router that plugs into my gigabit Ethernet network that I have everywhere, but it's connecting me on the other side of that router to a cable network, plugging the cable right into the back of it. It is a DOCSIS router, which is the standard used on cable modems. So I'm going from Ethernet to this other weird topology that is being used on the cable television side to run data. That's a mystery unto itself, but I don't have to know anything about that. My Ethernet network doesn't have to know anything about that. The router handles making that translation between a gigabit Ethernet network and this other other weird cable modem network on the other side. Or it could be ATM fiber, or it could be frame relay serial connections, or it could be a simple point-to-point. It could be anything. Doesn't matter. Our router's the thing making that change and making that determination whenever you're doing it. And so the question came in, of course, saying that, is the router then a gateway for two or more networks? I wouldn't necessarily call it a gateway, because in the world of networking, we think of gateway as a layer 7 type of device, but it is certainly something that can take data from one network media type and be able to send that out another network media type. And very often on the edge of networks, on large enterprises, in small offices, and in our home office, that is exactly what it is doing. So when you get that question about, is this best for a hub? Is this best for a switch? Or is it best for a router? There you go. There's the answers you should focus on when dealing with your A+ certification. Sponsoring this A+ study group, by the way, today is the GTS Learning A+ study guide. And these are folks that I've been working with for a number of months, because they have created these great study guides. They have A+ study guides and Network+ study guides and Security+ study guides. And I've really liked what they've been doing with study guides. They have exactly the type of information you need to pass your A+ certification. In fact, you can see, it's kind of hard to see, they are a CompTIA authorized partner. They are a platinum partner. And all of their materials are official materials from CompTIA. They take all of their books, they hand them off to CompTIA and say, is this a book that people could use to pass their certification? And CompTIA puts a stamp on it that says, yes, you are CompTIA certified materials for this. So when I first saw that, I thought that's great. I love that idea. And what they've done, and we're starting to blend this into A+ as well, we just finished the Security+ book a few months ago, where we took the entire book and we stuck my Security+ videos right in the book. And you may be thinking to yourself, how do you do that? How do you put videos in a book? What we did was put QR codes in the book. So if you're reading through the book or you're looking at the book online, you can either click the link for the QR code or hold your mobile device up to that QR code, and it will launch the YouTube video that correlates to what you're reading in the book. We're in the process of doing that for the A+ right now. So some really nice capabilities coming, blending together these different medias. It is an integrated planning guide to be able to do that. And if you want more information on what they have, there's an absolutely free download. You can go out to their website. I've got a link here at professormesser.com/A+book. We'll take you to that website. You can download a sample right away and have a look at their book. See if this is something that might work for your study guides. I always recommend that you have videos, that you have a very good study book, and maybe also some Q&A, which are also included in this A+ study guide. And there's some other things there as well. So make sure you take advantage of that if you're looking for some materials. It's also great that they're sponsoring what we're doing here at Professor Messer. Very nice to have them on board and very nice to work with them. Some great people over there. Let's go to the next question on this study guides that I got. Now, this goes back to something else that I've been working on my website. If you are not a member of the website, or you're not a member of this daily pop quiz, it's something I do for free. You can go out to professormesser.com and join the pop quiz. So every day I send out an email with a question that goes back to things you should know about the CompTIA materials, the things that we've learned in the CompTIA pieces. And that nice study guide there, the pop quizzes that I send out, are things that I do just so that we're able to get a better understanding every day and get updated every day of different types of topics. And there's one that I did on December the 7th that was a question. Somebody said, here's a question you asked, but I want to go further. Matt said, I want to go beyond the question. The question was, well, here it is right here. The question was called beep, 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 beep. And it says, you've just returned from a well-deserved vacation. When you start your computer, the display screen remains blank and it just beeps a few times. Which of these would be the most likely cause of this issue? Is it the monitor's not connected to the computer, the network cable's disconnected, the post has failed, or the power supply has failed, or the computer's just playing some really boring MP3 files? Well, the answer, of course, if you were following along on that study, was that the post had failed. The power on self-test had failed. And that was a bit of a problem. We don't know why that particular problem was occurring, but we know it failed. So the question that Matt asked is, now what do you do? It's great. I got the answer right. Yes, it's the post. You start it up, you get the beeps. It's the post. So now what? Well, now the question is, how do you resolve this issue? And this goes a little bit beyond the requirements of the CompTIA A+ exam, but I think it's worth asking, and it was a very good question in that regard. So if we think about these beepings, there is a lot of different things that can go wrong. The power on self-test is there to check the basic hardware and the basic connectivity of that hardware inside of your computer. It does a quick memory check. It checks to make sure there is a bootable device, checks to make sure it's able to access that bootable device, does a check of the video and make sure it's able to output video. It's a lot of things just to get a basic hardware set aside so your computer says, yes, this machine is ready to launch an operating system. And if it can't launch the operating system, then it gives you a beep. And sometimes it doesn't even put information on the screen because think about it. What if your video card is having a problem? The integrated video on your motherboard is having an issue. Well, there's no way to give you a message on the screen that the video is having an issue because the video has an issue. So one of the things that it does very commonly is it beeps at you. Now, a lot of people will send me messages and say, I need to know if it beeps 3 times short and 1 time long, what does that mean? Or a good example, Naples in the chat room said, what does a 2XX postcode represent? You have that is very specific to a manufacturer, very specific to a type of BIOS. There's no way to know just based on that description exactly what that is because it might be different between different manufacturers. The beep codes are going to be different between different BIOS manufacturers. You're never quite certain. So you will never be asked on an exam, what does this beep code mean? Beep, 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 beep. What is that? You'll never be asked that. You may be asked, what does beeps mean? What happens when you start up your machine, it starts beeping at you? What does that significantly mean? What does that possibly be? Well, it could be video, it could be memory, it could be the post has failed. That's what you need to know. So if you do have a beeping noise coming out of your computer, you're going to want to go to the manufacturers of that PC, the manufacturer's manuals. Yes, we will have to read something. We'll need to go to the section of the manual that says troubleshooting during startup, and it will have a list of what all of the different beep codes mean. If you get 3 short beeps, this is what it means. If you get 2 short beeps and a long beep, this is what it means. If you get 3 long beeps, this is what it means. It will tell you exactly what's going on with that. So the important part of that is that knowing that that's a post problem. That's a power on self-test issue. What you don't have to be too concerned about is all the different possible beeping noises that could come out of there. Now, the question in the chat room was, okay, what if it doesn't beep? What if there's no noise? You turn on the computer, there's nothing. Well, then you know it didn't fail post. It didn't even do post. It didn't even get that far. So you can also go back further now. Perhaps this is not a post issue. Now we're having a power type of issue, or our motherboard has failed completely, or post was not even able to execute. So keep that in mind as well. I agree that from Steve in the chat room, I wish they would standardize the beep code so you'd know immediately, but there's no requirement that they do so. There are many different companies making BIOSes. There's no reason for them to standardize, and most of the time you just plug it in and hope for the best. So that's one of the interesting things that came from that daily pop quiz. One of the questions in the chat room was, are these pop quizzes every day like the questions you would get on the exam? And quite honestly, I have no idea. I don't go back and reference the exam. I took the exam a number of years ago. I've pretty much forgotten the style and format of the exam questions. I don't create the questions with the idea that I'm emulating the exam. My goal for creating these pop quiz questions is to give you reinforcement and allow you to get feedback of how much do I remember about the CompTIA requirements. And so when I build these, I build them with a way that there's going to be an exact answer. I'm really trying to focus on a specific topic, and I'm trying to make sure that you understand that topic. On the exam, you might be asked a question very similar to what I have in my pop quiz or not. If you do, it's completely something that's not planned, but it is something I try to get at least a question that's going to make you think. And sometimes there's separate ones. And this question was a good example of making you think because the answer C was the post has failed. Well, you wouldn't know what that is unless you know what a post was. And if you knew what the post was, a power on self-test, well, then that applies back to the question. So I try to make these 2-step questions at the very least, so that at least you're trying to figure out what's going on. And a lot of people will send me questions or send me responses every day going, that was easy. That question was easy. Well, that's good. I mean, that's a great thing. I don't make these to stump everyone in the world. That is not my objective with this. My objective is for you to have some type of feedback that, yes, I'm learning this. And if it was easy, that is great feedback for you. That means you've learned that particular topic, and you know that if I've asked the question, that topic is one that comes directly from the CompTIA exam requirements document, and that's one more thing you can check off on your way to studying and getting that A+ certification. Let's go to the next question. What are the differences between memory types? We have a memory type of a DIM and a SIM and a SODIMM. What are all these things? And what are the differences between those? So I've got a number of memory questions that came in this month, and we're going to go through a couple of them, starting with this one. So let's look at memory and how we look at different memory types. If you've ever popped open your computer and looked inside of it, you know there are a number of slots there that the memory slides into. And if you look at one computer or another or many different computers, the slots look very, very similar. But the reality is that each one of these motherboards that we're using could use very different memory types. And there's no way to know exactly the type of memory type you need based on simply glancing at it. You may have to look very, very closely or look at the manufacturer's documentation for that motherboard to know exactly the type of memory that we need to put in there, because every motherboard's different. But there are standards in the sizes of the different types. And so let's look at SIM, and let's look at DIM, and let's look at SODIMM, because those are packages. Those are types of memory that's put into a format. And somebody may say, oh, my computer takes a DIM. Well, that just describes the type, the size, and the structure of the memory. It doesn't have anything to do with the type of memory that's on that particular package. For instance, here is a SIM. Let's go to this slide right here. There we go, our single inline memory module. That's what SIM stands for. You don't see SIMs very much anymore. They were used on the older 286 and 386 computers. I don't think by the time Pentium came along, I don't think we were using too many SIMs. They are different also pins, 30 pin and 72 pin. There was no real tight standard on these. They were close enough. You generally had to understand exactly the type of SIM that went in the motherboard, but it wasn't quite as structured as we have today with the different memory module types. This is very simple in how it plugs in. You plug in the SIM, you get the SIM has a certain amount of memory inside of it. And notice that it is a very structured view. It's very flat on the bottom with the memory contacts there across the bottom. And it's relatively small when you compare it to what we're working with today. The memory modules that I work with, I had some sitting out when I was taking some of these pictures. I was going to grab one and show it to you. But relatively small considering the different sizes we have today. But if you ever go back and you look at a really old 386 computer, probably has a SIM type of memory on it. And it is very modular. As you can see, it fits down and plugs into the motherboard almost exactly the same way that the other memory types that we work with today do. Another memory type you may run into that's a bit of a legacy memory type is the RAM bus inline memory module, which is not really why they call that a RIM module. It is simply called a RIM module. There really is not a type of acronym for that. This is something that was created and licensed by a company called Rambus, who really just did memory licensing. They didn't do too much more than that. That's where they made all their money, was we're going to come up with memory that's going to go really fast, and we're going to work all on the electronics. We're going to work on the engineering of it, and then we're going to sell the method of doing that to the manufacturers, to Intel, to Dell, to Compaq at the time, to many other companies. They did extremely well because they were very knowledgeable at doing this. And at the time, memory was one of the slowest parts of your computer. You wanted really fast memory to keep up with these really fast processors that we had. This was not a SIM type of memory, as Alex is asking in the chat room. This is its own memory package type. It had its own number of pins, 184 pins on the 16-bit type, and 232 pins on the 32-bit modules. They were very specific. You could not take this and shove it into a SIM slot. It won't fit. You can't take this and shove it into a DIM slot. It will not fit. It's very specific for a computer that has been designed to accept Rambus inline memory modules. So it's very, very unusual to find these days. You really don't see a lot of RIMs that are out there in newer computers because most manufacturers have moved away from them for a number of different reasons. And that's an entirely different podcast and video on something like that. And when you're working with the Rambus memory modules, they all work and every slot on that motherboard must be filled with something. So there are these things called continuity RIMs. So you in the 32-bit mode, they're called continuity and termination. Every slot on there has to be filled up. So you don't really see that many more in the newer systems. But if you ever run into an older computer, ones that are in the Pentium time frame or just afterwards, it's very possible that you'll run into a RAM bus module in there, and you'll see the memory modules, and then you'll see these other smaller little sticks stuck into the rest of the module slots. You're wondering, what in the world is that? It doesn't have memory on it. Probably is one of those continuity RIM or continuity and termination RIMs. So that's the RAM bus. Now let's get into more modern times, shall we? Take a sip of my drink here. Now let's talk about the DIMMs. And DIMM is probably one of the most common types of memory that we'll see today. The DIMMs that we have today are dual inline memory modules. That's what that stands for. The dual inline memory modules have these contacts on both sides of them. If you have any modern computer these days, any modern desktop computer, it's most likely using these DIMM modules in the computer itself. 64 bits of data that is being sent in and out of that memory module. Even if you are using a 32-bit processor on a motherboard, you are still transferring information in and out of this memory module at 64 bits. So there's a lot of data going back and forth on these. There's also different types of DIMMs. There is SDRAM, there's DDR, there's DDR2, there's DDR3. Different types of memory can be stuck onto a DIMM module. The DIMM is just the delivery method. It's just the package. You're sticking all kinds of other types of memory onto it and fitting it onto the motherboard. Now, a DDR DIMM is going to be a little bit different than a DDR2 DIMM and a DDR3 DIMM, and I'll show you what the differences are, but they're very minor. They deal with the type of package and how it plugs into the motherboard. But if you're working at all with memory these days, you're using a DIMM. Or if you're not using a DIMM, then you're using a SO-DIMM. SO-DIMM. The SO-DIMM is a much smaller version of that DIMM. It was designed for laptop computers. You might also see SO-DIMMs in smaller size systems, computers that don't have a lot of room, or sometimes even mobile devices. I've seen SO-DIMMs in them as well. It is effectively the same type of capacities, the same types of memories would go on here. DDR, DDR2, DDR3, for example, would be on a SO-DIMM. It's just a tiny little package. It's just a smaller one that fits much better into those mobile devices. So these days, you're either going to run into a DIMM, you run into a SO-DIMM, or some other type. If you found a RIM or you found a SIM, that's an older system that you would be working with. So let's talk about those memory types. Let's talk about those DDR and DDR2 and DDR3. Now that we know the packages, we know how to deliver the memory, we know how it's going to plug into the motherboard, what are all these different memory types? Let's start with the first one, double data rate, DDR memory. This DDR SDRAM is something that is, well, called double data rate. When we first introduced this, it was twice as fast as what we had at the time, as the ordinary SDRAM that we were working with. And sometimes you're asked on your exam that you've got this memory DIMM, and on it is this DDR memory. And you happen to have this bus clock rate of your memory that's running at 100 megahertz. What is the peak data rate, or what would you call this particular memory type? And you can see that there's this big calculation associated with it. You take your memory clock rate, your memory bus clock rate, and you use a multiplier, which is the only number that's ever going to change in these calculations as we go from DDR and DDR2 and DDR3. You multiply it by 2 for dual rate. This is dual rate SDRAM. The number of bits that we transfer in a single cycle is 64 bits. There's the 64. And you divide all that by 8 because you want to figure out bytes. And that's the bits per byte is your 8s. And then we start looking at exactly what's here. So we do the calculations and we get finally a peak data rate of 1,600 megabytes per second. And if we look at the memory module specifications, we call these memory modules PC 1600. Now, that's a lot of calculations. And normally on the exam, you're given one of two types of questions. You may be asked for a memory bus clock rate of 100 megahertz, what's the peak data rate? Or you may be asked, the memory module is a PC 1600. What would you expect the memory bus clock rate to be? Well, that's a big calculation, calculating it all out and coming up with a number. But if you look carefully, there's what I call a magic number here. For DDR, your magic number is 16. If you're asked a memory bus clock rate, then your peak data rate is approximately 16 times that. If you are given a peak data rate or a PC dash and a number, you divide that by 16, you get the memory bus clock rate. So just by taking that whole calculation, you simplify it down. We have to use algebra. We have to use math, and we simplify it down, and our magic number turns out to be 16. And that's, if you're ever given any question about DDR, just remember your magic number is about 16. Now, the one places where this gets a little weird is some of the peak data rates, or at least the name of the module, you divide it by 16, it doesn't come out exactly to that memory clock rate. It comes very, very close. So don't be thrown if your calculation comes out to 130 and one of the answers is 133. You're close enough. You're not going to be asked 130 or 136. You'll know that you're close enough for that. And you cannot use a calculator, Sincere, on these exams. So you have to be able to do this on paper, which they provide you, or they provide you a whiteboard, or you have to be able to do it in your head. Now, DDR2 looks very similar. Almost is exactly the same, except for some minor changes in the memory. And it is one, if you look at these modules, that we updated them. We made them better for DDR2. There's a better electrical interface, which means we get much better throughputs. There's a buffer that's built into the memory chip. We've got drivers that are off the chip that do other things. A very nice capability, and the formula is almost exactly the same. 100 megahertz as a memory bus clock rate, except notice your bus clock multiplier is doubled to 2. Everything else is exactly the same in this. Notice also that the type of module is called a PC2-3200. It's a PC2, not a PC. PC is DDR. PC2 is DDR2. That's how you designate the difference between those. And notice, because the bus clock multipliers changed, your magic number for DDR2, if you've not figured it out already, is 32. Now, this question Steve mentioned in the chat room is that I'm using this memory bus clock rate of 100 megahertz. And the question is, isn't that going to change depending on the motherboard? It absolutely is. So that's an example that I'm providing you. Your memory bus clock rate, you may be given a memory bus clock rate of 166 megahertz. Calculate out for me what the peak data rate will be. Well, you multiply it by 32. So you're going to have to base that number. They're either going to give you a memory bus clock rate, or they're going to give you that PC2 dash and a number, and you're going to have to figure out the other one of those. Now, the magic number for DDR2 is 32. It's exactly the same type of thing for DDR3. It's twice the data rate of DDR2. They're much more larger chip capacities that we can put on because our operating systems need a lot more memory these days. The formula is exactly the same except for the bus clock multiplier. And if we've doubled the bus clock multiplier, then we've also doubled our magic number. So that's what you have to remember across these two. Your DDR magic number is 16. Your DDR2 magic number is 32. Your DDR3 magic number is 64. And that's just a number I came up with. It's just a number based on the calculation there. I call it a magic number. That's a trademark, Professor Messer. It's something I came up. You won't ever see the word magic number anywhere in your A+ requirements. But it's something very common to say, here is what you have, and what do you do? And if you remember that calculation, or that magic multiplier or dividing number, it can make your calculations during the test run very, very quickly. Now, if you want to do it manually, just run through the formula and be able to figure out that piece as well. So it's very common to see that in the pieces in your exam when you're looking at that. Now, I mentioned to you that DDR and DDR2 and DDR3 were a little bit different in the packaging. They are still DIMM packages, but on the DIMM itself are these little holes, and the holes are specific to these notches that are on the memory slots of the motherboard. This means that I could not take a DDR and put it into a DDR2 slot. I cannot take a DDR3 and put it into a DDR2 slot. They will not fit. They physically won't fit into the slot. There's a piece of plastic that keeps it from sliding into the motherboard slot. So if you're cramming it on there, it's not fitting and you're looking for a hammer, don't do that. It's not fitting because it's not fitting. You have the wrong memory module to fit into that slot. Do not get your hammer. Do not bang it in there. Never on your motherboard force anything into any slot. If it's not moving, something's not quite right, and do not shove it on there. Notice the SODIMMs also have some differences in where the notches are. Some of the differences are very, very minor, but they're just enough not to fit in there. Yes, the chat room's telling me we're going to have to get rid of our hammers now. Those really nice big hammers we got aren't going to do us any good on the motherboards, I'm afraid, because if it's not fitting, it's because it's one of these types of memory modules and it's just not going to fit for you. Okay, this month we also got a number of questions about the questions. We always get questions about the questions. So I wanted to go through a few of those as well. We're through all the memory stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the A+ certification and some of the things associated with that. I need some type of music to play as I'm drinking my beverage so that we know what's going on there. So the first question we got, what are the differences between the 2009 and the 2011 A+ tests? And the answer is there's not a 2011 A+ test. But yet there were changes to the A+ certification that occurred in 2011. So this is what's confusing about this. If you go out to the CompTIA website right now and you download the exam requirements document, that exam requirements document will be listed A+ edition 2009. And if you were looking through it, you might think that this was the same exam requirements that came out in 2009, but that is not actually the case. The CompTIA exam, the A+ exam today, is the 220-701 and the 220-702. And that's what came out in 2009. That number has not changed. Therefore, the edition of the A+ certification has not changed. But when it got to 2011, a couple years had gone by, and CompTIA said, you know what? There's Windows 7 is all the rage right now. We need to add content into the existing exam and just slide it in there, some Windows 7 content. Let's also throw in there things like, what is IPv6? We'll throw some extra things. They threw a handful of new topics into the existing exam requirements document and quite honestly didn't tell anybody. Just put it up there. Suddenly you're downloading your exam requirements document after January 2011. You realize, wait a second, there's Windows 7 content in here. There's IPv6 content in here. It was not really that smoothly done. There could have been a lot more said about this. But the important part and what they were trying to do for you was not have it so that it's a brand new exam, not have it so that you have to retake an exam all the way over again. It is exactly the same 22701 and 22702. There is nothing different about the versions. So that part is good. The difference is, of course, that in January, they stuck some Windows 7 in there. They stuck some IPv6. They added a couple of other things in there, but not too much associated with it. That's why there are differences between what you used to take on the 701, 702 and what you take now, but the addition or the numbering of the exam did not change. So that's just something you need to keep in mind. Thank you, Dennis. Question from Matt. With Windows 8 on the horizon, when do you expect to see CompTIA add Windows 7 to the exam objectives? And I put this in here because it sort of blended together with this last question. Windows 7 is already on the objectives. You better know it because you're going to get asked about it on the exam. You better know how to install it. You better know how to troubleshoot it. You better know the minimum requirements for a client to use it. You better know where the files are stored in Windows 7. You have to know everything about 7 that you need to know about Windows NT, Windows 2000, Windows XP, Windows Vista. You don't have to know anything about NT. Boy, I just went back quite a ways there, didn't I? Kind of cracked myself up. No Windows NT, fortunately, but you still know. One thing that really caught me when they updated this is that you already had to know 2000. You already had to know Windows XP. You already had to know Windows Vista. and they just added on the Windows 7. They did not drop the Windows 2000 from this, which really surprised me. There is still Windows 2000 in very, very large environments out there. I still see people getting on a plane. I swear I am seeing this. They will open their laptop and they will start up and it will be Windows 2000. I am seeing it. It's real. And in environments that are very, very, very large enterprise environments, they might still have servers running Windows 2000 that have legacy applications on them that was built for Windows 2000. They're not going to change those anytime soon. You have to maintain them. But I found it interesting that it was part of the A+ exam even today. So I don't necessarily expect to see Windows 8 if there's going to be a future certification exam coming out. And let me tell you, because the question did come up in the chat room, there is, from what I can tell, and I have no information about what's happening at CompTIA. I am not a CompTIA member. I'm as independent as you when it comes to what's going on at CompTIA. But generally, you get to hear rumors and you get to see things prior to an exam coming out. For instance, the Network Plus certification was just updated on the 1st of December to the latest version. We kind of knew that was coming for a number of months because CompTIA posted the new exam requirements on their website. So you kind of knew that was happening. Now, what you don't know is when they might change the next one. And at this point, we've not seen any new exam requirements for A+ on the website. I would imagine that an update for A+ will be coming someday, but it does not appear to be in the next number of months. It will probably, of course, be somewhere in the next year. But if you're already studying for your A+, there's absolutely no reason you should have to worry about a new exam coming and what's happening. Because as Sincere mentions in the chat room, there's an overlap. Let me give you an example. The new Network Plus just came out on December the 1st, came out this month. But you can still take the old exam through the end of August of 2012. They give you months that you could go and take that old exam. Now, when you pass the old exam, let's say it's August 31st of 2012, and you're taking and you just passed the Network Plus certification, when you get your certificate, it says you passed Network Plus. If you took the new exam on August 31st and you get your certification, it says you passed Network Plus. There's no difference in the certification that you get. You are Network Plus certified regardless what edition of the exam you passed. So if you're studying for a current A+ exam, keep studying. Take the exam, even if they come out with a new one tomorrow, which they're not going to. But if they came out with a brand new one tomorrow, you're still going to have months to go to take that current edition of the exam that you are studying for. And at the end, when you get your certification, it is the exact same certification as anyone else would be getting if they took the new one. So don't let that bother you. Don't let that throw you from anything that you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Get that certification. At the end of the day, your employer just wants to be sure that you are A+ certified, and they may even require you to maintain that certification, and you're going to be staying up on the latest and greatest things, and perhaps Windows 8 will be in whatever new A+ certification exam comes. Maybe it won't be. We'll find out whenever sometime that day gets there. That is one of the things you have to keep in mind whenever you're planning to get the certification. And as you know, and as the question in the chat room from Sincere says, when do you know you need to recertify? When you get your certification, it has a date on there of how long that's good for, and it's good for 3 years. So there's many things you can do during that 3 years to renew that certification. You can simply wait 3 years and take it again. It will just die and you have to take a new one. You can get these continuing education units, and I mentioned one of those at the beginning of this. There's many different types of continuing education units you get, and if you're in the industry, you're just going to get units as part of your normal work. It's just something that's just going to be like osmosis. There's also an opportunity to take and pass a higher level exam will automatically renew your A+ exam. A lot of people don't realize this. If you've taken your A+ exam and next year you pass your Network Plus exam, your A+ just got renewed for another 3 years. If you then wait 2 more years and you take your Security Plus exam, you just renewed your Network Plus and your A+ for another 3 years. So your normal type of certification may also take and renew your existing A+ certification. And it doesn't have to be a CompTIA test either. You could take a Microsoft exam There's a possibility the Microsoft exam would renew your A+. There's a list of all of the exams you can take and what CompTIA certifications those would renew on the CompTIA website. You can look through those. So a lot of people don't realize that's an absolutely a capability. It maybe just says your normal certification. You take one of the new exams. Now suddenly the A+ is up to date. Makes it easy for you, doesn't it? One of the questions from Spider in the chat room: can I take the CompTIA A+ here in Brazil? Is it better to take it in the USA or the European or anywhere else in the world? It shouldn't matter. The A+ certification is offered around the world. The only differences are going to be whether it's offered in your language. So I have no idea if there is a Portuguese version of the A+ exam and what version that might be. You'd have to check the CompTIA website to find that out. And you can probably take it locally, have it right there. That's the best way to do it. Or they might say, nope, the newest exam's not going to be in Portuguese for another 6 months. And if you want to get certified, you may have to go to another country to do that. Another question from the chat room: will your passing score be listed on your certificate? Thankfully, no. No one will know your score. Now I say this because when the 700 series came out, I didn't study very much for it. I looked at the exam requirements, like, yeah. I'm just going to go and take it. And I'm figuring I've already created the 600 series certification courses. I do more of these types of courses all the time. So I'm just going to walk in. I missed a number of questions on that exam. It's driving me crazy to this day. I have no idea what questions I missed, but I missed more than one. I'm almost certain. Looking at the results that I got, you're never quite sure because every question is worth a different number of points. So I don't know if I missed one question that was worth a lot of points or if I missed smaller questions that were worth a smaller number of points, but I missed some. I don't want anybody to know that. So this is just between us, guys, okay? We're just between us here. Nobody's ever going to know about that. So that way, nothing is on your certification. All it says is that you passed, and that was it. Nobody else needs to know any more of that. If you pass by the bare minimum requirement, it's still a pass. And nothing about your score goes on your certification. So that's nice to know. That's very, very useful. There is another question I have in here: can you take both tests at the same time? Well, not the same time, but I think you mean take your 701, pass that one, and then right after, get a drink of water, take your 702. You can absolutely schedule them that way. If your testing center has openings where you can put them back to back, you can absolutely do that way. So what do I recommend? I don't recommend doing it that way, quite honestly. I'm not a good test taker from that regard. I study, and then I go in and the adrenaline is flowing and I'm nervous and I'm looking at the screen and I'm reading the question and I don't understand it and I have to read it again. Now I've read it 3 times and I'm not hearing it in my head and I don't know, and I have to settle down, deep breaths, Zen moment, and then finally I can go through and take the exam. But one of the nice things about sitting in that, going through that process, is that you get accustomed to your environment that you're in, the testing center. You get accustomed to the machines that you're using, to the people that are there, to the process of giving your ID and sitting in the room, and you're accustomed to seeing the first screens that come up that you have to agree to the requirements and the privacy that you have associated with that. All the things you got in the process of taking the exam. If you've never taken one of these exams before, it's kind of new and you have to pick the right one and click, and you can mark it and you can go back to them afterwards. There's, of course, a learning process associated with that. You might pick up on it very quickly, or it may take you a little bit more time. So I like to be able to go into an exam, get the experience, and understand how they're asking the questions. That's helpful too, to get an idea of how these questions are structured, and then take the exam, take those questions. Then think about it. Think about the experience you had, sleep on it, have it soak in other words, and have it get straightened out in your mind. And maybe the next day, or maybe a couple of days later. Don't wait very long, because a lot of the material on the 701 and 702 overlap. So you don't want to lose any of that knowledge that you've gained over that time, but maybe the following day, or take one on Monday, take one on Friday, whatever you think is going to work best for you. But some people do take them back to back. I get emails all the time, says I went in, I scheduled them back to back, I sat through both of them, I passed them both, I'm now A+ certified, and congratulations. Some people can absolutely do that. I'm not one of those people. So you have to think about the way you work and the way you've done that every time, because that's one of those too. Now Dark Monkey, who not only has an excellent name, but has an excellent comment in the chat room, recommends reviewing every question, because these machines, by the way, in these testing centers may be brand new, or they may be really, really old. You may have a mouse that they give you that has a ball in the bottom, a physical ball. Now, that's the way mouse used to work back in the day. We had little balls that rolled around, that touched pieces of metal that rolled around, that sent analog signals to your computer to determine where the mouse was on your desk. Now, that's great, but they get dirty, and we try to move them. Your mouse doesn't move right, and you're spending more time trying to figure out how to move your mouse than you are concentrating on the exam. Hopefully that doesn't work. Yes, it's the old man. When we had our mouses, had a little ball inside, and that's how we used them. And they worked great. But we don't really have those anymore. Hopefully the environment you're going to find will not be that way. But if you run into that, the point that Dark Monkey was making, and I like saying that because monkey is a funny word, is he didn't notice. He missed some selections. Some of the questions were left blank. And that's very easy to do. There's a lot of questions on the exam. What I like to do is go through every single question. And as I'm going through, if I think I know it, absolutely, I know that question 100%, I don't mark it. I just go to the next one. If I answer one and I'm 90%, I think I know that one for sure, I still mark the question answered, but I click a button on there that marks the question. There's a button at the top, mark it. So it marks it. And I go through all the questions. At the end, I now go through all my marked questions and I double check myself. Did I really know that one or not? And if I think, yeah, that's going to be my answer, I'll unmark it and I'll go to the next one. And I try to get through all my marked questions. And then I go up to, at the end, I then go through every single question to make sure I've answered all of them, and then finally submit. Because you hit that submit button at the end and you hold your breath. Submit. And what happened? Did I pass? And there's a delay, and there's a delay. And then it pops up with whether you passed or whether you did not pass. So that's one of the things to think about is before you hit that submit button, you've probably got some time left over. It's not going to kill you. Go through every single question and go through them again. And sometimes it helps because the second time through, you've answered a question on the back of the exam, on the last part of the exam, that triggered something in your mind that now you know the answer to one that's in the front of the exam. So sometimes that'll help you and go with that. Very, very useful. One of the last questions we got was from James H. Will the CompTIA A+ 2012 exam only include more Windows 7 than 2009, or will there be other core differences? I have no idea. We don't know at this point. I have not seen any type of preliminary pieces on this. Obviously, they must be working on it. But as I mentioned, I have no ties to CompTIA. They're not going to tell me about it until it's ready. In fact, many of you send me a message saying, hey, they just put out a new exam requirements document. And then I get to see it. So sometimes I'm not the first one finding these things. You're telling me about them because you're going out there much more than I happen to be. The idea is that I would expect certainly topics, just like when we went from the 600 series to the 700 series, here's how it went. 80% of the content was very much the same, but there was a section of the content they updated. They got rid of things like knowing a serial port connection, or they got rid of knowing, well, when before the 600, they got rid of IRQ numbers because we really don't deal with IRQ numbers anymore. We just deal with what happens when there's a conflict. In the latest version, they added Windows 7. You had to know a lot with Windows 7. They added know what IPv6 looks like and how it works, things like that. I would expect there will be a number of technologies that fall off. I will expect there will be some new things that are put on, and I would completely expect that the overlap will probably be about 80%, which is what it was last time. But when that happens, I generally create a document, a blog post that says, here's what the differences are step by step, section by section, so that you can get a better understanding of what's there as well. So let's go to the chat room. We've got some time left. At the chat room, we've been answering a number of the questions already. And Mario asks, what is your advice in studying the tables in A+? And I'm guessing that's those really, really big tables that you may find, like the processor types and the slots they plug into, or going through and understanding details of how to do that formula for understanding the memory speeds. There's all these formulas. My recommendation to you is to look at those to get the basic idea of how they work. And you may notice some of those processors, the number of pins equals the same number that is there for the slot that it plugs into. But don't get wrapped up in those. That specific question on a processor is a part of a domain section that's a part of a topic. It is a tiny, minuscule thing that you would need to know about. You might get one question about it. And if you spend a day studying processors, you've wasted your time because there are other things you could have been studying on and learning about that are much more important, that have much more of a higher emphasis on the exam than that processor slot and what happens to fit inside of that slot. So don't waste your time on the minutia. Don't get stuck into the details of this exam. Keep working on the things about what you need to know on your command line switches. Understand when you would use those command lines and how you would troubleshoot with them. Understand those networking technologies we talked about. Understanding the types of memory you would have. Those are much more important for your exam. And if you aren't quite sure, grab the exam requirements document, look at the different domains, look at how the different domains are laid out, and understand just how important that particular topic is to the overall requirement of the exam. CompTIA does an excellent job with those exam requirements documents. You should absolutely take advantage of them if you have not already. Another question from the chat room. What percentage of people pass the test? Nobody knows. Zoki G. Nobody really knows. CompTIA has those proprietary information. I was sitting with a number of people on my trip to London that run a number of the training centers, universities, some of the vocational type organizations, and they get very good pass percentages. And so from their perspective, I got a lot of good feeling that people were taking this information and they were passing their exams. Not everybody passes their exam. I've taken certification exams and failed them miserably. I always go back to a wiring exam I had to take about computer wiring. I took that exam 3 times before passing it. Sometimes it just doesn't click. So nobody really knows percentages of what's there. But I would imagine it's probably many more people pass the A+ than don't, or at least I want to hope that that is the case. One of the things that they did is when we integrated Windows 7 into it, people said, what do I need to know about Windows 7? The only thing you need to know about Windows 7 is exactly the same thing you needed to know about the other operating systems. You need to know how to install it, how to troubleshoot it, the processes, what's done to upgrade it, what are the minimum requirements, and they are completely laid out in the CompTIA requirements documents. Make sure you look at those if you're going to do that. And as Naples mentions, whether you pass or not, does it depend on if you watch my videos? I would hope so. But who knows if that's really going to be the case or not? We'd have to look and see. That's kind of where things are with the exams today and what we're doing with them. And we'll see what happens with CompTIA's A+ certification and what's going to be happening over the next year. And I completely expect there to be an update shortly. Shane in the chat room says the requirements are on the CompTIA website. I looked yesterday and there were not new requirements for A+ on the exam on the CompTIA website. So I haven't seen anything there quite yet anyway, unless they added them today. There's nothing out there that's new. So that covers all of our questions for this month. I do have some announcements before we close up shop. If you need to keep watching this, if you want to know the next one we're going to have, if you want to get our daily pop quiz, make sure you go to professormesser.com/Facebook, professormesser.com/Twitter, professormesser.com/Google+, and you can follow me on all of those. Twitter is probably your best bet. If you're not on Twitter, you should be on Twitter. There's a lot of good reasons to be there. If you never post, it's an excellent source of information. It's a great way for me to get feedback back to you. Again, our sponsor this week, thank you to GTS Learning at professormesser.com/A+book. If you need an A+ book, they have excellent, outstanding study materials. Our Network Plus study group is a week from today at exactly the same time, 1 o'clock Eastern time. You can find out more about that at professormesser.com/calendar. And that covers all of our topics for this week on our A+ study group. It's been a great group this week or this month. We got some great questions. We're going to do another one in January. We hope to see you back then on the A+ study group. Thanks, everyone.